Good evening and welcome to the April 1st, 2024 Planning Commission meeting. It is, oh, your mic's on. Oh, okay, why don't we call order and do the roll call, please?
McGee. Hauser.
Here.
Bixson.
Here.
Bachman.
Here.
Klauser.
Here.
Kenjuk.
Here.
Lloyd. Stone.
Here.
Gasson.
Perfect time. Good evening, sorry I'm late.
Okay, thank you. We have a quorum. Would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. Again, welcome to the April 1st, 2024 Planning Commission meeting. Let's go right to line item number 3, which is public comment. Any public comment on non-listed items? And Rose, is there anyone on the phone?
There is someone that just signed on with their hand raised.
Okay, caller, please unmute yourself and state your name and address for the record, please.
Hello, it's Jane Turner.
Hello, Ms. Turner, how are you?
Dylan. Hi.
Go right ahead.
I talked to Jeremy today to find out how come I haven't been receiving Notify Me of the Planning Commission.
What?
And he was said that it's not in the state's requirements. How about the city?
Well, let me find out, and we certainly want to make sure you get notices of all meetings. I guess I'll ask Mr. City Manager, Mr. Bandit.
Yeah, I don't think Jeremy said that, I don't know what he said, but I can tell you that at first, when he first got here, we weren't doing it. It had fallen under the wayside, so we talked about it a couple weeks ago, and we'd get back at it. I think you said this one, he forgot on this one, but it will become a normal procedure to put everything on Notify Me.
So, and just to be clear, Ms. Turner.
The last one I received was February 5th. So we've gone almost a whole month.
There's only been one meeting since then, so.
Right,
So we will correct that.
So here's what we'll do, Ms. Turner. We'll work our very best to make sure that that gets put back on the Notify Me. Is it an app? Is that what that is for the phone or the email blast?
Well, you sign up on the city's website, and I've checked, and I'm signed up for the Planning Commission, but there's nothing that appears.
Okay.
I would note that I think even though you get that notice, you still have to go to the website to go to the link to get to the Planning Commission. So no matter what, you still have to go to that. So
the email that's sent to me gives me that link, so I can go right to the agenda.
All right. So, and maybe what we could do too, is it possible to mail Ms. Turner the schedule of all the meetings for 2024? Is that?
No.
No, we're not going to do that.
Email me.
You got it. Okay. Ms. Turner, we'll do our very best to make sure that that gets remedied.
I get all the city councils.
Okay.
There should be no reason that I don't get the Planning Commission.
We will work on that, I promise you. Thank you. Anything else?
No, you have a good evening.
Okay, you too. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Rose, anyone else?
No one.
Okay. All right, then moving on, we'll go to line item number 4, which is the approval of the minutes, consideration of the minutes of the regular meeting of March 4th, 2024. Mr. Kenzik.
Well, I apologize for being a stickler here, but we still don't have it right.
Okay.
There's a reference saying that the corrected version was, we had a quorum for February 5th. We did not have a quorum for February 5th.
Okay. All right. Okay, with that correction, Mr. Peckins, is that something that you would make a note of, or Rose would do that? Rose, do you mind in the next version of the minutes correcting that to identify that February 5th was not a quorum?
I will take care of that.
Thank you very much. Okay, so absent that, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Okay.
Support.
Mr. Gasson, support. Discussion. Mr. Peckins, the roll call, please.
Hauser.
Yes.
Bixson.
Yes.
Bachman.
Yes.
Klauser.
Yes.
Gasson.
Yes.
Kenjuk.
Yes.
Stone.
Yes.
Okay. Line item number 5, public hearings. This is the notice of a public hearing for Oak Street Design, 114 West 3rd Street, or consideration of a facade change. Mr. City Manager.
Yep, so we're gonna go right to video. We saw this at our last meeting. The petitioner worked with video to correct some of the deficiencies in that plan. It's basically not a site plan, but it's a facade renovation, and there are some questions that were asked last time that were corrected, so Vidya's gonna go ahead and share her screen, I think, and go ahead and give us the report.
Go right ahead, video. Thank you.
Is the board able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Are you able to see the site plan on the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Hauser, members of the commission. The request before you tonight is from Jenna Campbell, the Director of Design and the founder of Oak Street Design. The proposal is to operate an office for an architect and design service on an existing two-story building located at the northwest corner of West 3rd Street and the Main Street Alley. And the site is zoned CBD, which is Central Business District. The applicant appeared before you for a preliminary hearing on March 4th of 2024 and was scheduled for a public hearing for tonight. The use is a principal permitted use in the Central Business District. With regard to access, there is no dedicated driveway since the building occupies the footprint along the property lines itself. The site does have 4 dedicated parking spaces on the north side of the building that can be accessed via the Main Street Alley. That is not being changed at this time. With regard to pedestrian circulation, there is an existing 8-foot wide sidewalk along the site's frontage on West 3rd Street, which is to remain as is without any encroachments. At the preliminary hearing, the applicant explained that due to great challenges, it wasn't possible to make the rear entrance into the building barrier-free accessible. So the front entrance of the building on West 3rd will be barrier-free accessible and ADA compliant. With regard to parking standards based upon the use of the site as an office, the site requires a total of 6 parking spaces. Per the city records, based on the previous use of the site is grandfathered in for 7 parking spaces. So the proposed use is still within the spaces that is allowable. The site has 4 existing spaces on it, which the applicant proposes to retain for employees and staff parking. The pavement markings for these spaces are not really visible at all at this time. So it is our recommendation that the parking area be properly and clearly striped so there are designated 4 spaces over there. With regard to trash removal, the applicant had explained that trash cans will be stored under the stairway on the rear side of the building. And there is a community trash enclosure just north of the subject site. So anything that needs to be dumped here can go into the city-owned dumpster enclosure to the north of the site. With regard to facade changes, the applicant is proposing no changes to the rear of the building, which is the north side. With respect to the east and the south facade, that is where most of the changes are being made. At the preliminary hearing, the applicant did mention that they propose to do something called glass blasting in order to clear off the existing paint on the building facades and see if the brick is in good condition. If the brick is in good condition, they will restore the brick. Otherwise, the brick is going to be painted over if it's not in good condition. Some of the historical details, like the arches you see on top of the window, are all to be maintained on the building itself. Those are the historic details of the building. Most of the work is going to be done on the front or the south-facing facade. There is going to be a whole new storefront window system. There are going to be new columns with wood trim added. There's going to be a new cornice. There is an existing cornice on the building, which is going to be scraped and painted. So basically the entire building is going to get a major facade uplift. With the restoration of all the details, installation of new windows in the openings, and creation of the storefront system, it should really enhance the front of this building. With regard to lighting, the plan proposes 1 fixture on the rear wall of the building for safety purposes because there is a staircase. There are going to be 2 gooseneck style light fixtures on the east side, which is next to the alley. And that is basically to highlight a future sign that's going to go on that wall over there. In addition to that, there are going to be wall-mounted light fixtures on the front And the applicant intends to have these fixtures be uplights. Basically, they're going to be designed to shine onto the historical features of the building itself. Whenever a light fixture is not downward directed, we always have a concern whether the fixture is going to shine onto the night sky. So we want to be sure the applicant is aware that any uplights are clearly angled in order to point only at the building's features and don't just shine out into the night sky. They need to take care of that when the installation is being done. With regard to landscaping, the site has a small planter on the east side next to the alley. Right now, it's a broken down wooden planter. What the applicant is proposing is to remove that and replace it with a new continuous trough kind of planter that will go along the entire east wall to the length of the building. And that will be planted with ornamental grasses. And for a building that is built up to the property lines and the fact that it's got street frontages all around it, addition of this planter will significantly enhance the curb appeal of the building itself and actually accent its historic character that the applicant is trying to reestablish. Finally, with regard to signage, as I previously mentioned, the only sign proposed is a new wall sign. At this time, we don't have any details, but before installation of the sign, the applicant needs to make sure that it is submitted for administrative approval. So based upon our review at this time, the proposal meets the city's ordinances. It is our recommendation that the Planning Commission grant site plan approval for the proposed facade modifications for 114 West 3rd Street, subject to 3 conditions: restriping of the on-site parking spaces, ensuring that the accent uplights are directed towards the building wall and not at the night sky, and submission of signage for administrative review prior to installation. I would be happy to answer any questions the Commission has. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidya. Commissioners, any questions? No? Oh, Mr. Gasson, go right ahead, please.
This is for the site plan review?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Question to the city manager. In the introduction, you mentioned this is really not a site plan, it's a facade improvement. How do you distinguish that?
All of our applications, if you have a facade, we put in a site plan, but they weren't technically in the beginning touching anything, so semantics, I guess.
Okay. The question of the planner, for the parking, which was 6 is provided, or at least that's what I thought was in the report. 7 is grandfathered, and then 4 I see on the site plan. Am I confusing myself by seeing 6 in the report and 7 stated and then only 4 shown?
6 is required based on the ordinance standards. 7 is what they are grandfathered in for. 4 is what they actually have on the site.
Okay. And of those 4, restriping doesn't show a barrier-free space. Is there a minimum
Yes.
required in order for that to be a requirement?
Actually, if you look at my preliminary review, Mr. Gasson, I had recommended that the space that is closest to the rear wall of the building be made barrier-free accessible. But when the applicant's architect appeared at the last meeting, they explained that the grade difference that is there between the rear door and the alley, the parking itself, makes it very difficult. There's not enough room or enough slope that they can provide to make this ADA compliant. As a result of which, they would not be, even if they stripe this as barrier-free accessible, somebody in a wheelchair would have to go onto the alley in order to make it to the front entrance, which would not be a safe pathway for barrier-free access. Hence, all of these are just regular spaces, and they intend to have the on-street parking space serve as their barrier-free parking space with a ramp to the front door of the building.
I appreciate that explanation, but I'm not really sure how the rear parking not having enough space, it would obviously be 3 spaces instead of 4 if you were making one barrier-free. But based on grades, I guess it makes it a non-compliant space. But the 4 that are there are certainly no less non-compliant than one that's got a different kind of slope, if you follow what I'm saying. It's going to be non-compliant based on your explanation either way. Is that correct?
No, these are regular parking spaces. So regular parking spaces can be striped on any pavement, but when you have a barrier-free accessible space, it needs to have a ramp to get into the building. And if I understood the applicant correctly, they are unable to create a ramp access from a barrier-free rear into the store. The applicant will be presenting. I would ask them to explain that better. They explained it at the last meeting, so I would like them to go over it again to be able to answer your question.
Okay, I'll wait for their answer, but I'll restate my position again. The 4 spaces in the back are non-barrier free.
Correct.
If you make it 3 with the proper clearances around one of them, it's still non-compliant based on your explanation of the slope. But it's more barrier-free than the 4 that are there now. Not totally compliant, but it's more barrier-free than not. And the access from that to the front door, which is accessible, I would argue is safer than parking on the public street and maneuvering from the street into the building. That's a really tough area. Any one of those streets going off of Main going west is not an easy thing for a pedestrian, let alone someone that's mobility challenged. I'm really anxious to hear the explanation from the applicant.
If I may help, we would not support having somebody in a wheelchair, let's say, go, the way that alley works, you're coming down, so you'd have to cross the alley lane where the trucks are coming through to get to the side against the buildings where you would go to get in the pedestrian area that's marked. Then you'd have to cross it again to get into that front door. Main Street's got no handicap parking on it. You can't unload on Main Street, so this is no different. I would think you would be doing a disservice to somebody in a wheelchair to roll across the driveway, down the side, across the driveway again, with people coming out of that alley and trucks and they're loading and unloading. So that's why, in this circumstance, it's safer to be out in front. Not easy, but it's safer to be out in front, not just to get to the ramp, but just the movements against traffic there. You would not want somebody stuck in that alley. That's a blind alley going back there, David. So that's my take on it.
Mr. Gasson?
I appreciate that thought, but I'm very familiar with how that maneuvering works, and I would strongly suggest it would be far safer in the alley, even if you have to cross the alley to come down and cross again. That's going to be way safer than trying to do that in a public street.
That's why they don't have any on Main Street, because you're right. So, but not every building has handicap parking next to it either, so.
But, well, I guess to my point, is it a requirement? If you're doing a site, we required it at the Downtown Inn, we required redoing of barrier-free parking at the apartments on Wilcox Street. Is it a requirement? If it is, I would like a much stronger justification why it can't be done.
I don't know that it would be,
Or
because they're not
be
touching
a
the parking
betterment.
lot. So, yeah, that's up to Vinnie, I guess.
And the issue is,
Yeah,
go ahead, Vidya, please.
I don't know, in fact, whether it is a requirement to make the parking barrier free. I do know the requirement would be for you to make the building barrier free accessible, which the applicant has done so. But I'm not sure if ADA requires on an existing parking. Were they to redo an entire parking lot, then I would say yes, they have to make it. But in this case, these are existing spaces that are merely being restriped, and I'm not sure ADA requires it, although we try to recommend that if wherever feasible, they should put in an ADA compliant space. I'm not sure it is mandated by ADA. Maybe the applicant has got an answer to that too.
Okay. Any further questions from the commissioners? Is the applicant here? Okay, do you mind coming up to the lectern? And you heard some of the questions. Hope you're ready.
Absolutely. So, I'm John Campbell of Oak Street Design, presenting for us today. So thank you all. Surprised not that you can show up for our meeting this week as last month. But in relation to the ADA space, so our understanding is not a requirement. It's not a requirement on because we're not changing the parking lot to have to put an ADA compliant space. But our main goal was, and when we were redoing the front of the building, because a lot of our designs we have to accommodate even in home design, which is not subject to commercial design, we really try to plan through those things. We made that barrier-free entrance at the front because the back, the grade change between where the parking lot sits and where the back door is, and that back little addition has a very, basically to accommodate that, we would have to tear down the whole back, and it would make it financially not viable for us to take on this project if we had to tear off the whole back and rebuild it all. So that's why we provide that access from the front.
If you want to talk further, then I think we'll probably have some questions afterwards, but is that the,
Yeah. So
Okay.
That's the quick answer to it.
okay. Commissioners, any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Gass, I think you might have one. Go right ahead.
No, another question. I have a comment and then a motion. What you're proposing here is wonderful. I really think this is a great transformation of the building. I think the use will be strong as compared to the ones in the past. And with that, I'd like to make a motion to approve the site plan as.
You gotta have the public hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, you know what I'm gonna do with
You let the cat out of the bag.
I appreciate it.
I would also say that we received 2 letters of support that were emailed to us from some residents in town who spoke very favorably of your program here. So those should be put in the record as well, I suppose. But I guess for purpose of today, so we'll have a motion to set this for public hearing. No, we don't even have to do it. Okay.
Public hearing today.
That's it? Okay. Okay, so at 7:21, I will open up the public hearing. Rose, is there anyone online?
There is no one online.
Okay, and doesn't appear to be anyone here. So at 7:21, I will close the public hearing on this particular matter. Okay. Mr. Bainett?
Is there an opportunity for additional
Yes,
questions?
so if there's any additional questions, Mr. Bachman, go right ahead.
Of the applicant? That's
Yeah,
okay.
go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I think on the diagrams, there was some question about where the AC units would go. I think we've settled that. The diagrams show they're going to be underneath the stairwell.
Yep.
On the north side, okay. Do you plan to lease any of the space to other businesses, or is this just going to be for your business?
I've got an attorney on council here, so I want to make sure I answer this correctly. Our intention is not to. Our intention is we're going to occupy, it's owner occupied from the terms of, not that it matters, our terms of our mortgage. That's how we have to occupy the building, is owner occupied over 51%. We, in total transparency, we might have one extra office based on our team size right now that we might sublease, if, someone's looking to be like, a CPA in an office or something like that. But, our intention is to grow our team actually, over the next year, and fully occupy it.
Okay. And I think I was leading to signage and wondering if there's any plans to submit additional signs other than for your own business?
No.
And could that change in the future?
My intention, unless I'm misspeaking, my intention would be it's always our signage. Even if we had one other occupant, that would be part of it. It's just, the space is ours, the meeting space is ours. It's more of just if someone wanted an office space away from home.
Okay. And I just had a question about glass blasting,
Yeah.
which I think is different from sand blasting. And I'm curious, why you chose that method.
So it's interesting. Glass blasting. Jenna, do you remember the specific differences on this? You said.
Supposed to be finer, so it's supposed to be easier and gentler
On the brick than a traditional
I
sand.
actually can weigh in.
Go ahead,
Because
Mr.
I helped
Vanda.
restore a cabin up north, and there's 3 kinds of blasting. So there's sand blasting, cob blasting. So when you're on wood, you use corn cobs that they grind up. So the initial point of the corn cob is a little bit stronger but softer on wood. When you get to brick like this, they use diamond blasting, or glass blasting, I'm sorry. That's just, again, coarser, smaller, kind of powdery, that can get at the brick. Sandblasting would tear up the brick more. So we had to make those choices on that cabin, the 3 different things, so I kind of learned about it back then. So my understanding is to get paint off appropriately and not destroy the original brick, that they go to glass blasting.
Do you have a follow-up question? Because I had one about that.
Just my only follow-on is what the cleanup process looks like after doing that on such a large surface.
That was is there a containment area that's set up when you do this blast?
Usually, I mean, even on the corn blasting we did, and they'd have to block off the sidewalk and everything around, but I don't usually think there's tarps around it or anything. It's
Okay.
pretty much hits the building and drops down, so might be watered down a little bit. We had to water down the cobs, I know that. But again, that building official will make sure that that's done safely, so it doesn't affect adjacent neighbors, streets, all that good stuff, so.
And to give a comment to that, because I'm sure we've had people in the past, and rightfully so, say, hey, I'm gonna take on the project ourselves. We're using a professional builder on this project that's done numerous projects around here in town, on the commercial and residential side. So that will be a licensed professional taking care of that, communicating with the city, and making sure that all stakeholders are happy. And I know that might sound like throwaway words, but truly, like, because we're on a tight site and we have a lot of things going on, we're gonna have to really be communicating with people. So that's our mission on that.
Wonderful, okay.
One last
No,
question.
don't be
I
sorry, go
think.
ahead.
So Vidya talked about the lights, sort of illuminating the features of the south facade, the front.
Mm-hmm.
And the lights are gonna be located on that cornice, I guess, right?
Yep.
If that's the right term. I don't think I've seen any visuals of the lights. Is it even possible, because I think that cornice comes out from the building, is it gonna be possible to illuminate the second story?
So we're talking about, the lights are gonna be down low on the front facade there, and it's gonna be angled up towards the building. So you're gonna be actually angling the light up towards.
You'll be able to do that?
Yeah, I don't know a better way to describe it. Like, the throw of your light, well, this is not gonna help people not online, right? This is a dramatic cut section, but this is the top of the building. We're angling the light towards there, towards
Okay.
the top there.
So you'll be able to clear that?
Yeah.
That front
Yeah.
storefront?
Yeah.
The storefront system, window system? Okay.
Commissioners, any further questions? Mr. Stone?
Yeah, I got one. Good evening. It's a nice renovation of the building. Thank you for bringing it forward. Where and how are we handling trash? I see on the drawing it says toters. Does the existing old unit have dumpsters, and now we're going to trash those?
So I think, so originally when we, at our last meeting, we had proposed we were gonna do AC units up on the roof, and we were gonna do, trash cans right underneath the stairs there, even though we have a community dumpster at the back of our lot, which you can kinda see in the picture.
Yeah, they're in black.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
But when we were talking about, what does that look like if you put AC units on the roof, and so we went back with our builder, talked through a few things, we're actually gonna park them underneath those stairs, that way we're not, from a looks perspective, but then also actually from having to have punctures in our roof, we're not gonna place anything on the roof, and so then we're just gonna use the community dumpster there.
Okay, so air conditioning units, as shown on the drawing, go under the stairs right
Yep.
there where the mouse cursor is, and
Yep.
then we're eliminating the trash toters, recycling
Correct,
toters?
yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stone. Any other questions? No? Okay, so Mr. Banda, now just from a procedural, if you could refresh my recollection, so.
We make,
Yeah.
the council decides and makes a motion.
Exactly, yeah, okay, just want to make sure I was following the process correctly. So you've heard from the applicant, you've heard from city engineer, city planner, I'm sorry, so is there a motion to recommend that the planning commission grant site plan approval for the facade renovations?
So moved.
Are we closing the public hearing?
I did, yeah, it was 1 minute long, yeah, so I did it.
Okay.
So.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion?
I'd like to make a second with a friendly amendment for barrier-free, that what's being designated as the barrier-free on the public street is so signed and made barrier-free.
We can't, it's not that, we can't, it's not.
Can you, in plain English, and that sounds silly, what are you proposing into your amendment?
Without going into the amendment right now, just
Yeah.
by explanation, the building site should have a barrier-free parking accommodation if it has parking. Right now, it has 4, that aren't being modified because of the technical grade issues, not space, technical grade issues. We can't accommodate in the public way, but you're designated that as your public, your accessible parking space because that's close to your entry. Either one, I guess, would be fine if you designate it. Someone that needs barrier-free access is going to shy away from parking on the street. They just do. They'll want a place that feels more accommodating out of the public traffic area. I think 3 spots with the proper circulation, even though the grade isn't technically correct, is going to be several steps closer to compliant. I think that's what should happen. Otherwise, it's we are missing an opportunity. This is a site plan submittal. You're adapting the site. On the street side, you're putting some planters on the alley side. I think it's a compromise that you would have to make, obviously, because you have 4 spots and you'd go to 3. If we can't make the street side accessible, I think we should make the site accessible as much as we can. And I'd be willing to make an amendment to that, or second it with an amendment saying, yes, but if the building official deems that ADA is required, that the 3 or the 4 in the back get modified to 3 is best as we can, without technically regrading it. Just stripe it for 3, if ADA is required.
So, Mr. City Manager, is that something that's,
I think that's totally fair. I just want to make sure we weren't, like, directing them to the alley and down, that the building official was going to say you can't do that, so.
Okay.
I would agree with what Mr. Gasson said, that if it's possible to do it, we always try to make it better.
Sure.
But I just want to make sure, I don't know the rules about crossing the alley and stuff, so we haven't done that in the past, but certainly we can leave it up to the building official.
Vidya, you had a question?
I just had a comment, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to share my screen, and from a planning standpoint, I have a serious concern about merely striping a space in the rear of the building just to make it look ADA compliant. By putting the space there, you're essentially telling a person in a wheelchair it is okay to come down the Main Street alley to the front door. That is a very, very unsafe situation. But the image on the screen shows you there is a minivan. Now the new planter is going to go till here. You're technically asking somebody in a wheelchair to come down this pathway and make this in. It is always our hope that people have their eyes on the road when they are driving, but a distraction from a driver and a wheelchair coming here is not the best or safest. So may I suggest that your motion, if to address this concern, you say that we work with the building official to try and see the feasibility of how best to designate a barrier-free space for this site if required. If it has to be this space designated, so be it, or if there is another solution, we would discuss it with the building official, but I would hesitate to say just stripe it in order to provide for a barrier-free accessible and then force somebody in a wheelchair to come down this road. This is not good planning design.
Thank you. Mr. Gasson, you have a question? Go ahead.
For my amendment, the language she used would be totally fine with me.
The feasibility?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but if it's required, it's required. But I want to just respond to what you said as a planner. That makes total sense. Put yourself in a wheelchair or a walker. How are you?
Worries me.
How are you going to get to the? Where are you going to park? First of all, where will you park if you want to go to that building? If you're in a walker or a wheelchair, where? No matter where you walk or park, you're going to have to do all those things you just said. You're going to have to walk through some things that aren't comfortable, and you're not going to know where, if you're going to that building, where you should park.
So I would add to this, there's a parking lot behind this Mrs. Buckerfield's property. It's on the Masonic lot. There are handicap spots there. You could literally park there, come down, normally get to the sidewalk all the way around the corner and never cross another driveway, because there's not a driveway at Tanya's there.
Down Walnut?
All the way down Walnut, turn the corner, come back, go in the front door with never having any conflict. It's far, but that's where the handicap spots are closest to this.
Go ahead, Mr. Gasson.
I hate to beat a dead horse, but I have these comments on every application. And I like to shine a light on the challenges that people have in a walker and a wheelchair. The things we've debated here,
Absolutely.
the alley is the issue, right? The Masonic parking lot is used, and all those people go across the alley to those Main Street businesses. That's how they don't go to Walnut. They go down the alley. And people are generally courteous, not always, you have to watch. But you're not gonna avoid the difficulty. What I'm trying to point out is if you're going to this building, you wanna park as close as you can to it. In front of it, if that's deemed appropriate and can be made designated in some way, that's totally fine with me. Back to the language the planner introduced, if the motion maker accepts, that would be my amendment.
Mr. Banda, I have a question, and this is more curiosity. Where that black SUV is in that picture, does the city have the right to designate on-street parking like that as handicap?
If you did it properly, you have to have a regular handicap spot. That's van accessible. You can't get there. There's a curb there.
Gotcha.
You can't come out the back. It's not wide enough,
Okay.
number one. So it's a dangerous situation.
So you
I'm
can
not
do it,
saying
but just not at that spot?
I mean, I would think someone could come down where that van is, get dropped off, and go in. But I guess if somebody was able to, like a walker, for instance, you could drive yourself. My cousin he hand drives, and then he gets himself out of a wheelchair. That, you're right, that it would be, he'd have to do what I said, if he didn't want to go down the alley, all the way around the building. But in the street, we have never allowed handicap parking on the street.
Mr. Gasson, go right ahead.
There are standards for street side barrier-free parking. It's not, you couldn't say that's it. You have to adapt it, but there are curbside barrier-free spots. I've seen a couple in the city of Warren, and they're not ideal, but they work.
Right, I'm sure you could design anything for that.
Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Mr. Bandit, would you have to you don't charge for handicap,
Correct.
so then you'd lose the income, the city would lose the income from that, whatever that.
It was a designated spot, yep.
Right.
So with that discussion, Mr. Stone, you had made a motion. Mr. Gasson, you had made a slight amendment to it. Do you want to restate and clarify your amendment to see if Mr. Stone would be amenable to supporting
The
it?
amendment would be that the applicant and administration work with the building official to determine how the existing parking is being modified to better accommodate barrier-free parking or in front of the building.
Mr. Stone, is that something you could agree with?
Yeah, I can accept that.
Okay.
Great.
So a motion made by Mr. Stone with a modification from Mr. Gasson that Mr. Stone has agreed to. Is there support for that motion?
Support.
Okay, Mr. Gasson, support. Any discussion on the motion before us?
I just want to understand what we're requiring of the applicant with this motion. Is there a requirement to enhance ADA, or are we only requiring that enhancement if ADA requires parking at the location?
My understand, if you want to take a stab at what you understand, go ahead.
My explanation is, if it's required, what we're asking the applicant to do is work with the building official to best accommodate, not strictly adhere and comply to the technical requirements, but make an attempt to provide a barrier-free spot, if ADA is required at all.
Okay, so the applicant has no requirement if ADA does not require barrier-free parking.
That'd be
at
correct.
the location. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? No? Okay, Mr. Peckins, roll call, please.
Hauser,
Yes.
Bixson,
Yes.
Bachman,
Yes.
Clauser,
Yes.
Gasson,
Yes.
Kenjuk,
Yes.
Stone.
Yes.
Okay. Congratulations, thank you, well done. Looks like a very nice project, best of luck to you, okay?
Thank you all.
You're welcome. Okay, moving on, number 6, considerations. This is the consideration of payment in lieu of parking for 105 East 2nd Street. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Vidia's got so many plans that we're trying to take a little load off if we can on some of these easy ones. So there's a lot going on in her world from us, certainly. So Mr. Brinker, who owns Chomp, he's the proprietor of Chomp Restaurant. He is a tenant in that building. So Chomp was on facing Main Street. Then along 2nd Street was the second iteration of our tattoo shop. That was their Collective Ink, I believe it was called. They've relocated and expanded to East Street, so they abandoned that spot. I Chillin' was the space in the back. It was a little bubble ice cream, or I think bubble, what's it called?
Bubble tea.
Thank you, bubble tea. It was back there. That young lady gave it a go, didn't make it. A young man is now per se as a little coffee shop. without tables or chairs. He just decided to just go in there and make coffee, and he's got a couple other things that he sells. So, in the meantime, Mr. Brinker called and said, I think I'm gonna take the collective ink space and expand, at this time. So, Dr. Haratzis owns that building. Dr. Haratzis, he's a dentist. He also owns, Bellissima Building across the street, and he owns the Chase Bank Building. So, he's been a great landlord. He's worked with the tenants, very happy with, Chomp. Chomp's been great for this community. So, it was an opportunity to expand the dining facility inside of there. We had talked about, in the long run, Mr. Brinker talked about maybe looking at a bistro license, which would actually be perfect in this location, would meet all the standards that the city has. They're really called redevelopment licenses. I think we call them bistro licenses. He thought at this time he's gonna hold on that, so just asked to expand it to the space. So Video was talking about grandfathered spaces. So we had the tattoo space in as retail. It was designated retail. When you add, so that's for every 200 square feet, you need one parking spot. To expand the dining in there would be for every 150 square feet. So you round the two numbers, you come up 2 spaces short. So he told Mr. Brinker he could ask Planning Commission for consideration to purchase 2 spaces at this time, which allow him to go in there and use that as a dining area. Floor plan's inside of your packet, I believe, and tonight we're just asking to set the public hearing for your May meeting.
Okay.
I believe the family's here. I thought somebody was here. Okay, but we'll make sure that he comes to explain if you would like, at your May meeting, but we're good with the request. There's, public parking right across the alley.
Okay.
So it's not a stretch to know that those 2 spaces can be accommodated there.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions? Mr. Gasson?
I was gonna make a motion to set a public hearing in the next possible meeting to consider payment in lieu of parking.
Okay. Hold on 1 second, because I saw Mr. Kensick had his hand up.
Yeah,
I'll get
actually,
you
I
to
have a question. If I'm not mistaken, when that, I guess, bubble tea set up the outdoor seating, didn't they take over a couple parking spots?
They did. So when it wasn't bubble tea, but actually that's Chomp's outside dining.
Yes.
So technically there was 1 legal spot back there because you can't back into the alley that way. So there's still 2 back there. So, but in the chart that we have, he was at maximum. He got credit for that in the back. So this was an add-on because of more intense use. So
But at this time, there's no plans to convert that outside seating back to
that's
parking
correct.
spots?
So everything else stays the same. You would just purchase the 2 spots. Correct.
Mr. Vice Chairman, a couple questions
Yes.
for the city manager. So just a clarification, I think that the same owner owns both, owns that whole building.
No,
We're
so
Chomp's
Dr. Lenore
different
owns the
owners.
building, and Mr. Brinker is the tenant in Chomp. I'm Haratzis, I'm sorry.
Right.
What did I say?
You said the other one.
Got me nervous there, man.
I was like,
Wow,
oh,
we were just
yeah.
talking about that today.
Did you get triggered? Yeah.
PST, sorry. So, yeah, Dr. Haratzis owns the building, so tenant, Mr. Chomp, Mr. Brinker owns that. Collective Studios had their space, and then the Bubble Tea had their space.
Okay.
Now he'll have 2/3 of the building.
Are there any intentions to change the facade of the tattoo parlor?
That I don't know.
And
He did not ask, I'm gonna say no at this point, I do know. No, at this point, if he went to a bistro, he would talk about doing that, but at this point, I don't think so. I don't know if they would paint it or not, which doesn't come to the planning commission, but if they touch the windows or the doors, it would have to come back here for facade renovation.
I wonder, is it maybe possible, instead of doing parking in lieu for cash, to do parking in lieu for a refresh of that?
That would be a loan. No, we used to have it's funny
Sort
that
of
you say,
subsidize
we used to have a program
yeah.
through the DDA facade renovation, but parking fund needs the money, so we'll take the money.
Okay, that's not an option, all right.
Yep. But we will ask him that when he's here at the next meeting. We can see if he's gonna paint it or anything. He hadn't indicated that.
Mr. Bachman, any further questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Ms. Clausen?
I was just curious how common it is for us, is this common practice to do the pay in lieu of?
Yeah, so, very good question. So Mayor will remember this, back in the day, long time ago, over 20 years ago, they started this program. Give you a quick history if I can here. So Main Street, from bridge to bridge, both sides of Main Street, we're in a parking exempt zone. So like many, many traditional downtowns throughout the country, you did not want to say to somebody, you need 8 spaces, so they buy a historic building and tear it down just to put a parking lot. So they exempted parking, so it didn't matter what you did. Beauty salons were way heavier in parking requirements, restaurants with alcohol, medical facilities. didn't matter what you did on Main Street, you were exempt from parking. And then when we decided to build the parking structures in 2014, we needed a way to balance that, to have all the business community and the parking management district that we created, which is basically the core of downtown. They would help pay the first 3 years of the bond payment on the parking structure. So at that time, we literally went through every single building and confirmed the square footage and the use that was in there. And I have an awesome spreadsheet on my computer that says, in 2014, this is what you were. In the spreadsheet, it says how many square feet, the use is in the parking calculation chart that says you would need X amount of spaces based on your use. It's a formula that kicks out how many you need. Number one, most had 0, and you would need, in this case, 8 total. So, so you were grandfathered in at that moment in 2014 to say, that's what you should have had, and that's what you get credit for. So any use that came in that upgraded the intensity of the site would need additional parking. Back in the day, it was $12,000 per space. We literally had, nobody did it when I got here, but in the 20 years, for a period of 5 years, 2 spaces were purchased. And at the, which is now the brunch house, somebody had bought 2 there. It was so expensive. So to convert a retail into a restaurant on Main Street was, I think it averaged $450,000. You would have to write a check if you were in a 5,000 square foot building in order just to have the parking. So then about 5 years ago, we wanted to try to incent the folks to revitalize downtown a little bit. So we knocked it down to $7,500 per space. No takers. 2.5 years ago, we looked at it again. We had a debate, should it just be 0? It used to be 0. And we thought, no, the administrative part of doing the work is worth something, so we put it at $1,000 per space. So if you need 10 or less spaces, then it's granted by the Planning Commission. You have to write a check before you get a C of O. If it's 10 or more 11 or more spaces, you can go to the city council, ask for an agreement to say, I would like to spread that out over a 10-year period. But if you stop making your payments through the 10-year period, it's extinguished. So a lot of times the building owners will make the agreement so they have the right to continue paying and keep that credit. So if you were 6 years in and you had put $6,000 in, you're walking away from it when they could just pay 4 more years to get to the 10,000. So we've had multiple uses now. I think this is our 4th one in pay in lieu of in the last 2 years. So it's working. It's incenting some of these businesses to go. It's coffee shops. It's been beauty salons that are converted, or some of the jewelry stores that are just pure retail. If you want to put a beauty salon or a barber, we've had the speakeasies come in, things like that. So it's actually been a great economic tool to incent people. It puts some money in the parking fund. It's not going to make or break it. And more importantly, we look at every individual ask. When the marijuana folks were here, they were just locking up buildings all over Main Street, knowing they didn't have enough parking by ordinance. We'll just come for pay in lieu. But our word to them was, if you don't have parking adjacent to or without crossing a major thoroughfare, we're not going to approve pay in lieu of. If you have to cross Main Street, so for instance, if you were north of University on the west side of the street, Dr. Atala's side, some folks up there, Bangkok Cuisine, for instance, wondered if they needed more parking, where are they going to come from? There's no place up there. The 2 shops that were the marijuana shops way north of Main Street, we'll just pay for parking. There's nothing within half a mile of them. Here, you cross the alley, and that's public parking. On First Street, south of First Street, we struggle with that. And if 120 South Main comes back, remember they were asking for 30 spaces, but they were going to put a stairwell down to get down the sidewalk, across the street, and that lot under the bridge is free parking. So they were within walking distance. So it's been a good incentive, and we had a few takers in the last few years. So, but we don't just automatically say you get it. They've got to prove where it's at. Tide Cleaners, we said, won't support it. You have to cross 2 streets to get to the lot, and that's just not safe. So that helps. So.
Thank you for the context and background.
Commissioners, any other questions? So there's a motion by Mr. Gasson. Is there support?
Support.
I'm sorry, who's that?
Support.
Mr. Bachman, support. Okay, discussion? Mr. Peckins, roll call, please.
Hauser,
Yes.
Bixson,
Yes.
Bachman,
Yes.
Clauser,
Yes.
Gasson,
Yes.
Kenjuk,
Yes.
Stone.
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, moving on, number 7, miscellaneous. So, letter A,
Yeah, 6, actually 6A. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, sir.
That's okay. 7, miscellaneous. We're going to start with the initial discussions on the short-term rentals. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you. Sorry, Mayor and Mr. Guest, I know you've heard that parking thing about 52 times in your life, so I apologize for that. But it's good information, I think. So, not unique to Rochester. The industry, and I talked about this at City Council when we had our initial discussion last week about this. In my planning career, we've seen waves of things that have changed. When we had, back in the day, there were motels, and when they went to hotels, how you calculated parking for hotels we didn't know anything other than motels, and this is relevant. So, you had 2 spaces for every room in your motel. When hotels came, they put conference centers in, cafeterias in, restaurants in, and pretty soon cities had to make a decision. Are we gonna charge more parking? Because they don't have enough parking and they're overburdening systems. Beauty salons, tattoo parlors, things that didn't exist before, tanning salons. All these different waves came through in planning, and this is the next one. So it started a few years ago with what I referred to, and Jeff always reminded me, it's like saying Kleenex, but it's Airbnbs, it's VBROs, it's technically short-term rentals, correct? So that world it started in the tourist towns in Michigan, it started up north, and it quickly became evident that people on a lake that bought a cottage decided, and now you've got 32 houses on the lakes renting by the weekend, because you can make bank on a weekend and pay your mortgage off real quick with somebody else's money, and change the whole character of that lake or in town, residential areas. So usually it was confined to tourist areas that people were, hey, I want to stay, I don't want to pay for a hotel. Well, hotels pay taxes, and they have brick and mortar facilities that they have to maintain. So, and they run it like a business, and they are charged a non-homestead rate for what they do. So it started catching on again. Northern Michigan worked its way down. And we've learned, the city of Detroit had many, many bed and breakfasts. The next evolution was bed and breakfast. You literally ran it. You had to live there, primary residence. You served them breakfast, lunch, whatever you did. That was the next evolution. Now it became, I'm just going to rent you my house on the weekend. I'm going to Europe for 2 weeks, so I'm going to make some money in my house, and here you go. And it started bleeding into the neighborhoods throughout Metro Detroit. We have, I think, Chief, 580 rentals, home rentals in our town registered. That's homes that are not lived in by the person that owns the home. They rent them out. We created an ordinance over that years ago, the rental inspection ordinance, and it's worked for us pretty well. If we find them not complying, we go through the process, make sure they comply, they register, they have voluntary inspections. We have a system where every year the chief can pick 10% of the housing stock, that's rental housing stock, including apartments, and inspect them, and they have to allow us in. So it was working out great, and then came these short-term rentals, and the complaints start coming from the neighbors. Like, I happen to live next to one for a while, and it's discerning to see every weekend somebody come home and do whatever they want to do at that house. And the way we set it up and the way we've been handling it in the past has been, if we are told there's an Airbnb someplace or a VBRO, then we contact the owners and say, check number 1, is it a non-homestead or homestead? Number 2, are you registered as a rental? If you are, then you have to follow the rules, which are, every time you change a tenant, you have to let the city know and either self-inspect it and report it every single time. Well, if you're doing it every weekend, the odds of that happening, and we're not driving around the street looking for them, so it's based on complaints from neighbors. And as soon as they complain, Mayor, I know you had one by you, I think, on Terry, right? Mm-hmm. So then we would follow up with that, and we actually have had one person in town that has followed it every single time. I don't think I'm exaggerating, Chief, that every time he changes a tenant, his might be 3 weeks or so, he calls in, does the registration, there's no cost to do this at this point. When we did the rental inspection program years ago, City Council felt people pay taxes, we weren't going to charge for that. It's an enormous amount of paperwork. Code enforcement is constantly doing this. Now with these short terms, we're getting them all the time. So we talked about it and looked at, we don't want to be the razor's edge, or the cutting edge necessarily. So many communities are taking this on now. The reason we didn't jump on it a few years ago was the state kept introducing bills that would say, we're gonna deal with this. And unfortunately for the hotel industry, it was, we're gonna say no home rule, home rule city, right? We're not, tell you that you can't stop these things from happening. And they kept threatening to write ordinances saying, cities, you cannot stop them from doing this. They have never got that far. It's never made it through the process in the legislature. So other cities are now stepping up going, we're not waiting any longer. We're gonna take it on. And if we decide to do what we are gonna outline with you tonight, then if the state law changes, it would trump us, obviously. But we've done our job for our residents to try to protect the presumed residential character of a neighborhood. You didn't buy a home to have an apartment complex next to it. It's not zoned commercial or multiple family. It's a single family home that should be used that way. So hence, we work with city attorney. He'll go over some of the content of this. We got some great input from the council on Monday, which even made it stronger than we were. We were trying to be as fair as possible and not be overburdened, but I think council took a harder line stand on this about multiple family and stuff. So with that, Attorney Crott.
Mr. Crott.
Thank you. That's a great lead-in. So this was before City Council last Monday, and it's already here. So that tells you that City Council wanted to get it into your hands soon. And just a quick point of, so in your packet were two separate ordinances. And I want to explain, because I know we have some newer people. So we have the city code and we have the zoning code. If it was just a city code, regular code amendment, you probably wouldn't see it because City Council they handle all that process. Whenever it's a zoning code change, it has to start here at this body because that's the way the state law is set up and our local ordinance. So there's two ordinances here for you. One is the actual meat of the short-term rental. And what it does is it's a amendment of the current rental property ordinance. So that's the document that is in section 12-251 and following. That's the actual city code. That's where we're gonna put in all the specific regulations about short-term rentals, how they're different, how they're gonna be treated different. And the other document in your packet is the zoning code. So when we looked at the actual short-term rental ordinance that we're going to put in place, one of the considerations that administration and city council dealt with is what zones are we going to allow? Because as city manager said, the state law that kept getting proposed was going to say cities and villages and townships, you have to treat these as single-family residential uses, and you couldn't do anything about it. And the Senate bill kept being introduced, and then it would not pass. So that's still out there lingering, but there's nothing pending that we're aware of. So city manager's right, we're waiting, because why put an ordinance in place? It was just going to be superseded. So we're back here now, and city council has determined, at least at the initial part last week, that we would allow short-term rentals. So the rental property ordinance covers the whole city. Okay, so I want to kind of say the rental property ordinance is really not what we're talking about. We're talking about a subset of that rental property ordinance that doesn't exist yet. And that subset is short-term rentals. So we have the umbrella being rental properties, and then short-term rentals being underneath that as a subset. So that subset of short-term rentals is being proposed to be permitted in essentially not residential areas. So I don't want to say that in that double negative, but it's so not in your neighborhoods, not your R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, multiple residential uses or residential zones, and the RT district. So those are the ones that you would not allow that in. So when you look at the zoning ordinance that's before you, there's four different sections that we're looking to put before you for consideration. It's the same change, it just goes through, the first section is for the, CBD, the second one is for B1, the third one is for O1, and the other one is O2. So those 4 districts, it specifically allows short-term rentals to be in those zones so long as residential uses are otherwise permitted. And why do we say that? Because down Main Street, you can't have, residential uses. Not too long ago, we actually said you couldn't have on the storefronts. If you recall, we put in that they had to be, on the second floors. So any residential uses had to be on the second floors. The city has, on the books already, the, upper story, upper floor apartment uses in that zone, especially the CBD. So that's already in there. So what we didn't want to do by this is to say, to open up the floodgates to say, oh, it says it's permitted in, for instance, CBD. Well, then I want it, on a storefront. No. So we said, that's why we put in there, only to the extent residential uses are otherwise permitted. So if you have an apartment above a business on Main Street, you could use that as a short-term rental situation. So that's where it would be permitted. So that's the only thing that this zoning ordinance does, is it identifies in the special exception use category. As a little primer, there's 3 different types of uses in the zoning code. There's permitted principal uses, which are the ones that you're like, okay, that makes sense. They're like CB, use that as an example. Principal permitted uses, retail. Okay. Then you go down to accessory uses. Accessory uses are uses that you can't stand by themselves in that zone, but are normally associated with that, with the principal uses. So if there was a related type use to the permitted one, then that would be as well. Then we have what they call special exception uses. Some communities call them special land use, special land uses. So special exception uses means that we're gonna allow them in there, but you have to come and get city approval for them, not just swapping out, say, retail uses, not like that, but it's, you'd have to come through. So when you look at some of these, like on CBD, although I did put unchanged, so you can't really see all the examples, but upper story apartments, overnight lodging facilities, that's the newest one we put in there just last year. So those uses, so if someone wanted to have a short-term rental use in one of these 4 districts, they actually have to come to Planning Commission to get approval. Not overly difficult process. Think of it kind of as a site plan, that type of process, because they have to come before you for approval. So that is I guess the mechanics of why we're here today. City Council said, we want Planning Commission to look at this because we want to zone it into certain areas, which are the 4 that we mentioned. So what this does from when we look at, not that it's Planning Commission in your wheelhouse to look at, or but I know City Council is interested in you vetting the other part, the other code provisions, which are, we have short-term rental. So what, we add definitions in there. We put in there that you have to annually register them. You have to get at least a yearly, it doesn't make, I'll say this, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do a tenant changeover. Normal rental uses, you have to do one of these inspections at tenant changeover. So normal, someone can rent their house in R1 and they could have a year lease. And then they have a new person come in at that tenant changeover, they would have to do one of these self-inspections to make sure that everything is still safe and the way it should be. So before this is put into place, every single time someone uses a short-term rental, or their place as a short-term rental, they have to come and do this in self-inspection, like the city manager said, every changeover. So you could have to do it every single week. Chances are the condition has not changed in a week, so such that an inspection would be necessary. But that's what's on the books today, so that's what they have to do. So what this does is it wouldn't require a per tenant changeover inspection. It would have to be an annual inspection. And there's an annual registration requirement already for any type of residential. So it's kind of, they're already doing the registration. At that time, they would need to do the inspection as well. So that is, so in here, that's where you get into the annual inspection, which is in 12-255. That's the annual. Only the red line is what we're changing. So then when you get to 265, that's really the meat of the short-term rental regulations. So it kind of goes through a purpose clause, which is usually, it's very helpful and proper to do a purpose, like why are we doing this? So if we're justifying, if we get challenged, this is, we put in here, this is the public purpose, this is why we're doing, that's the purpose section, which recognizes that these are very much more intense uses, and therefore the idea is that we don't want them in our single-family residential areas. That's I'll boil it down there. But there's also benefits to these. Provide extra housing, opportunities for those who don't live in the area to come and visit or to have one of your residents make income. So the rest of that section is kind of what I described. You get to the performance standards. That says, you know, I mean, I've used short-term rentals a fair amount, and I know many people have. So one of the complaints that people get from the neighbors is it's too loud. They're making racket. They're coming in all hours. They've got whatever. So when you think of performance standards, we have those in our zoning ordinances elsewhere. But these are specific to short-term rentals, and it's such that you have to have off-street parking. You know, that would be a requirement. It has to meet our noise ordinance. You know, they can't violate the noise ordinance. They can't violate the light ordinance. They can't be disruptive. They have certain hours that we put in here. So there's a lot of I guess, performance type standards. You know, campfires have to be in fire pits. Most of these are non, you know, they're just common sense. But you can't encroach on neighboring properties. Trash receptacles, you have to make sure the trash is all taken care of. One of the changes that city council asked me to put in that wasn't in initially is to have a minimum period of time. So, you know, one of the complaints, and there were a number of residents that came and spoke on the topic last Monday, is that, you know, every single day there's a new somebody there. And so but a common use of short-term rentals is not always 21 days, 14 days, 7 days even. 7 is a very common one, but oftentimes it's a long weekend. So city council had directed for the draft to put in here that it has to be a minimum of 2 days. I'd put 48 hours, so there's no, you know, when does the clock start, right? So 48 hours is that. So, and then it goes through which zones it's permitted, which zones it's not permitted. And then it goes into, well, if you violate, what happens? So someone has to get a license, a short-term rental license from the city to do this. And whether there's gonna be fees charged or not, that's gonna be up to city council. You don't see a dollar amount in here. Most of the city's fees that they charge are set by, they put them into, instead of having to amend an ordinance each time you increase or decrease a fee, it's in what they call their master fee schedule. So the city has a master fee schedule. It's online, it's updated, it's looked at least yearly. And so that's where you would find what the fees are for anything in the city. So the city council is gonna be considering whether or not to charge fees for this or any other rental situation. Back when it originally went in, there wasn't, but, you know, things change. Administration costs have changed. So if someone violates, so, you know, what then, right? So there's a section for, if there's a violation of the short-term rental license, then the city manager has to make the call. Is that a violation? Is it not a violation? If it is a violation, there's an appeal process. Always good when you have ordinances to have appeal processes for due process. So that would be to city council. So if city manager Banda makes a determination that you violated this short-term rental, and they say, no, we didn't, then they could have a hearing at city council. And if it's found to be a violation, then at this point, it reads that that license would be suspended for 90 days. And if that's for a first offense. For a second offense, then it would be up to 24 months. So that's, you know, it's pretty hefty, a pretty substantial suspension. And it's also, it's also would be considered a code violation. So it could be prosecuted in the court system with the issuance of tickets. So, there is quite a, you know, there's an opportunity to make money in these, but there's also, there was enough outcry or concern on these that city council wants to put in a robust ordinance. At least that's at this point. And so what's here for you today is if you want to chat about these, that's what city council is hoping for. But at a minimum is to set the zoning ordinance for a public hearing. Any zoning ordinance is required to have a public hearing. The procedure, at some point, it could be tonight that you say, we move to set the ordinance for a public hearing. I think that's what city council, there's two on the board here that I'll let them speak for themselves. But I think the idea was to at least get that process started because there's a public hearing notice, you know, 15 days, newspaper, that kind of stuff. So you're looking at a minimum before that happens to be the May meeting if you did it tonight. So then when it comes, you conduct a public hearing just like you did tonight with site plan reviews. And then the action is you don't approve a zoning ordinance. What you do is you consider it, vet it, and then you said if you're satisfied with it, then you make a motion to send it to city council for consideration. Then you've done your part. Now city council does their thing, holds a hearing, and decides whether or not they want to pass an ordinance as you saw it or changes. It can always change along the way. So that was a long, but
No.
well, I tried to go a minute longer than next, but.
Very helpful.
So hopefully with that context, I know we have some newer people, so we wanted to give them more of that robust. You haven't seen zoning ordinance come through yet, so, which is one of the reasons I'm here in person, not on the screen too.
I
so.
appreciate that. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
One thing I think I'd like to do, and then maybe open it up for discussion with the commissioners here, is I would like to talk to, and have maybe Chief Cesar come up. If you want to give a little perspective and context, I know you spoke at city council last week, but for some of the new members here, I think it would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. As the city manager Banda mentioned, we're well over 500 rental homes in the city of Rochester. That's quite a few if you think about it. The majority of these are private residents that have been converted to rental property. What we also see is years ago, and I'm not sure when, a large portion of the apartment buildings in the city of Rochester were converted to condos. And those condos now have been purchased by people more than likely as an investment, and then they're now leasing those out. You know, some people have 6, 7, 8 rental properties in the city of Rochester that are renting them, and so keeping track of them is quite a task. Attorney Crott mentioned our one person who has rented out his property in the last 12 months, or I'm sorry, in the last 3 months. He's had changes of 15 times in his house for rental property, and we finally got compliance from him because we took him to court and got a court order for that. So just a little bit of follow-up for Mr. Mayor is, as you recall, at the last council meeting, we had a robust discussion, and thanks to our residents on the Lysander, I was given some information last week. We did some follow-up. We found that the one gentleman did not follow the process over the last week, and he was cited with a civil infraction. We're waiting for a court date for that. So we'll let due process handle that process. Just a little bit of information, about 65 to 70% of our blight cases take place because of rental property. Our largest portion of calls and complaints of issues from renters, obviously, are from properties that they're renting from their landlords. We try to stay out of the renter-landlord disagreements, and we try to keep things basically on a safety standpoint from there where we get engaged with that standpoint. The only thing that I would point out is that there are some rental properties on Main Street. If you think back into the history of Main Street, we had many family shops that were on Main Street, and we had many families who lived above their shops. And those shops are now being converted over to apartments that are being rented. And we do know that there's several on Main Street that are being used as Airbnbs from that standpoint. So parking might be an issue for somebody who wants to do an Airbnb on Main Street, unless they're gonna go ahead and park in the public parking lots or at the metered areas from that standpoint. We appreciate your consideration with this in regards to considering it. We see that most of the places that are renting as Airbnbs, in particular, the one that we had to go to court it was a very nice house. There's probably 3 or 4 bedrooms. And so instead of 1 car in the parking lot, there were 2 cars in the parking lot and 3 cars on the street because of the total number of people that were in that house. So parking is definitely an issue in some of the cases. And as we know, some of our older houses on the west side really have no driveways and can only park on the street. So that is also a consideration for you to consider. Stand here to answer any of your questions that you might have.
Any questions for Chief? And then we'll open it up here for some discussion, if that's okay. Chief, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. If I can, and Mr. Mayor, please fill in if I forget something. So we had this issue come up on City Council last Monday, and it was a very good conversation. We had several residents come in and talk about their experiences. Unfortunately, they were negative with respect to the short-term rentals. And one of the things I think I'd like to be very clear about for my colleagues here is where they would be permitted under this ordinance and where they would not. So if you go on the city map, there's a land zoning map there, and it has all the color codes for what R1, R2, et cetera, are on. And just to be very clear, under this proposed ordinance, short-term rentals would not be permitted in R1, R2, R3, R4, R5. Those are your traditional single-family homes around town. There's also RT, which are the condos on the east side over by the ice rink area over there off of Parkdale, correct? Then there's another section or another area that would not be permitted, and that would be RM1 and RM2. Now, I will tell you, initially, those would have been permitted, and then City Council, I think all of us pushed back pretty aggressively and said, no, we don't want those to have short-term rental designation either. And just to be clear for everyone on the commission here, RM1 and RM2 are your condos and your apartments. So think Great Oaks, think Forest Ridge, think Village Green, think the lofts, you know, all those things. Also think about, and I'm not saying this as any type of forecasting, but Solaronics, okay? So Solaronics wants to be converted to RM1. That would be a prohibition on the use of that property, meaning short-term rentals would not be permitted there, okay? So it was the idea, I believe, and again, please, I don't want to say anything out of school, but City Council had said, no, we want to restrict short-term rentals strictly to the Central Business District, B1, O1, and O2. So that's where that came from, is there was a general consensus among everyone to get all the residential out and keep it into an area where it does commerce, where business is done on a regular basis, because for all intents and purposes, that's what short-term rentals do. This would, and Jeff, please correct me if I'm wrong, this would not have any impact on long-term rentals, as we'll call them, in the residential area. So if you have a house in Rochester and you want to rent it, you can do it, provided it's for 27 days or longer, okay? So there's no change in that as well. But I just wanted to get that out there very quickly so we kind of understand geographically the areas that we're talking about. So with that, I will gladly open it up to anyone who wants to provide some comments, and I see, Richard, your hand is up, so you'll go first.
Actually, I have several, so if you would indulge me.
The floor is yours.
Okay. First of all, can either Mr. City Manager or someone give us an idea as to how big of a problem is this? Do we get like 1 complaint a day, 1 a month, or what have you?
It's funny, it's kind of cyclical. We see more complaints around the holidays, I would say. Probably not uncommon. Bright lights is probably a big time to where we see a lot of this go on. And during some of the summer months, June, July, August type timeframe, seem to be the areas, and I'll be honest with you, it's kind of, I'll call it, if you were to do a heat map, it's probably more of a heat map style to, there's one or two places that will get, we'll get those type of complaints, and I have to be honest with you, as the city manager Banda mentioned, we go around and we do blight inspections and we look at safety and everything on a daily basis in the city, because our belief is let's prevent fires instead of having them. But the only time we know when we have a short-term rental or even a long-term rental, a lot of times is by feedback from our residents, where a resident will call and say, hey, this house next to us have people coming and going every weekend, and so that gets put on our radar. We send letters off to the property owner. We remind them about following the processes. And really, in the case of like the Lysander property, I had a chance to speak to the neighbor as she was leaving, just to remind her, hey, I really need your help to let us know when people move in and out, because we don't always see that, and we have to rely on our residents for some of that information. So I was a good politician. I skirted around your question. So there's probably 6 or 7 properties that we constantly hear issues with in regards, out of the some 500 or so rental properties, but I don't know if that's a high number or a low number. And we do know that there's other Airbnbs that are out there that we have not identified yet, but they are advertising, and they're pretty smart, or we're pretty dumb from the fire department standpoint. We'll call them up or try to get to them, and you can't get their address until you give them a credit card to start booking it. So it's really hard to go ahead and identify some of the other Airbnbs that are in town. Hopefully that gives you some info.
And if I could add, so a new cycle now is in communities that have snowbirds, you can make a lot of money over 3 months while you're gone in your home. If it's somebody, you talk about, Jeff, I thought I was paying attention, but if you have a family member that you want to have stay in your home, we don't count that against you. If you've sold your house, but they let you stay for a month extra because you're waiting to get in your new home, we're not after these people. This is somebody that's not using this as their principal residence. Yeah.
Okay. Chief, is it fair to summarize that this issue is really limited to like 6 or 7 rentals that you say? And did I also hear you say something to the effect that we may go for a long period of time without any complaints, and then suddenly, because of some event or what have you, we get a whole bunch of complaints?
I would say that that's typical, and in the case to where we have a couple of our residents who will kind of keep track for us, and what they'll do is they'll either call or they have my email, and they'll email me and say, hey, they just moved in out at the address, and we'll go to our system, take a look, and yeah, sure enough, they either followed the process of doing the paperwork and the inspection, or they didn't. And if they don't, then we send a warning letter, and in this case, like on the Lysander address, we actually issued a citation, so.
And I would say, Jeremy, in my world, that doesn't cross the chief's world, if a house goes up for sale, I can almost guarantee you one of us is gonna get a call and say, if I buy this, can I Airbnb it? That's the new wave now. So people are buying them, saying, I'm glad they ask. We tell them the rules, but can you technically, if you follow the rules? But that's a very common question, at least once a week. If there's one for sale.
And then, is there a significance to the 27 days? It's rather odd to me. I would think it might be 30, 60, or 90, or something like that.
Not magical, other than 28 days is, 4 weeks.
4 weeks, yeah.
So that's kind of where that was. So if you look at anything, essentially a month or longer, is people generally don't rent short-term rentals for more than 4 weeks a month. So it's not magical, other than I divided by 7 easily.
Okay. Under section 12-265, where it talks about family occupancy, it's not clear to me, but if I were to rent my home to my child or a niece or a nephew or my brother or sister, would I then have to register?
Let's see here. That's the exceptions, right? That you're looking at?
Yeah, 4A.
4A. Second.
My understanding
Yes,
is
so
you would
that's-
not.
you could not do that, without registering, because it's so long as there's not remuneration. So if you let somebody, then that's not a short-term rental, because you're just letting somebody go in there. But once they're paying you for that, then it would fall under a rental property. So if you have someone who's house sitting, for instance, we come up with that example. You're out of town, you're going to Europe, and you want someone to house sit for you, not an issue. That's not what we're trying to curb. But if you are renting it to a family member, then that would fall under that.
Okay. Under section 5A, performance standards, you allow motor vehicles and trailers. I would request that trailers be deleted because at least in our bylaws, they're not allowed to be maintained on the street or in somebody's driveway. And this kind of gives permission to do that.
Within the city code, there are provisions separate from your home bylaws that does allow trailer storage for a certain period of time, but located not at the front of the house. It has to be on the side yard or behind the front facade of the house. And I believe it's for not to exceed 30 days.
And then also, I would make the suggestion, at least in the Airbnbs that I've stayed in, I've always seen, like, displayed a fire escape route, and I don't see any wording in here to include something like that. So that would probably.
Yeah, that would be something that would need to be added, if I'm not mistaken, Attorney Crott. There were some suggestions that we made when we got into rental inspections 10 years or so ago when we did that, but the council at the time wanted to go ahead and keep, some of these items that we made suggestions just to stay with the self-inspection. And then what we did do is council allowed us to do a 10% audit. So out of the 500 and some houses that we have right now, we do about 50 or 60 audits of those houses where we'll call up the owner and say, hey, we'd like to come in sometime in the next week or so. And we use that as a verification of their self-inspection.
And to Mr. Kensick's point, is that what a required, like a fire escape route? Because I think that's actually a pretty fair.
No, it's an excellent
add to
suggestion. In fact, it's required in places like the hotel and our new renovated hotel on Main Street. Those are required in those locations.
But I think that's a good add, and we'll add that to it.
And then I guess the last comment I have is to the complete prohibition of any rentals in the residential areas. Personally, I think that may be a bit severe. I would recommend maybe a once a year exception to allow something like that. And, I can only think of an opportunity that happened once where, if you recall, many, many years ago, they had, I think it was the PGA Tour in Oakland Hills. People were renting out their homes for a week for $10,000 plus. Technically, this would preclude something like that.
And we're starting to hear some of the same things with the little thing that's coming in called NFL Draft in 3 weeks that 300,000 people are coming to town for.
So I think in the first iteration, there was a carve out. I think it was 14 days, two options or two segments of 14 days, not to exceed 20. Did I say that correctly?
Maximum of 14 days, two events.
Yes.
Two segments of
Yeah.
time. Yeah. To your point, that was in there.
Yeah.
City council, that was one of the items they asked me to take out, because, well.
Yeah. It just, watch the video, you'll see it, but I just think that there was probably too much room for abuse in a sense, and say, okay, who's gonna sit there and count, how many days were you in there, and all that. I think it was the oversight was the issue, at least is my recollection.
I would though remember enforcement on this is going to only be, by complaint basis. We just won't have knowledge of when somebody is Airbnb their house, so it'll all be complaint driven.
Any other discussion?
I'll take some questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Margaret.
Is there any feedback in favor of this? So I get the idea that you're getting complaints from residential, primarily 6 or 7 properties. is there anybody who really is chomping at the bit to do this? Is there a reason you just don't ban it citywide? That's my first question.
That's,
Mr.
Lawyer?
That's a big one. So I think the answer is, I think there's a lot of people that would like to do, the Airbnb, and mostly in the areas that we would be prohibiting. So I think the answer is probably easily yes. One of the bigger issue from my perspective is that when you, in zoning law, if you don't allow something in your city, that it gives somebody an argument that, to fight you on it, saying you can't zone. For instance, years ago, a big thing was mobile home parks. Municipalities were going through and completely zoning out mobile home parks. And so then the mobile home people, park owners, came in and fought and won in saying, the exclusionary zoning is the word, is you can't just exclude those just because you don't want them, because otherwise they may not be allowed anywhere, right? So, and it serves a group of people that needs to be served, right? So when we go through and we talk about different uses, now, again, we're not prohibiting rental uses throughout the entire city, right? We're just talking about a subset. For instance, when we did, when the big thing happened with the oil and gas, around us in hookah, or marijuana, medical marijuana too. So what we did when the city gave direction to me and administration to we don't want that in our city, what we said is you can't just exclude that, but what we can do is provide appropriate zoning for it, which is kind of where we are here, right? Which is, oil and gas drilling, right? If you look in the code book, it's permitted under certain regulations in the industrial areas, which if I was gonna ask you what would be the most appropriate zoning to have one of those things, you probably would have said that. So in this particular case, so we don't feel necessary, or maybe the safer way is to allow it in some areas that you would be okay with it, your commercial areas, right? That's not where we're getting the complaints. And if it's a commercial area, are we okay with it being in a commercial area? And so far the answer has been yes. So that's, versus when the state statute says the cities completely zone out marijuana uses, marijuana retail shops, that's because the state statute says we can opt completely out. So we were safe on that ground. But otherwise, your uses, you really can't zone out completely. You have to provide for it. Legal businesses.
That makes sense. Okay. And does special project have any bearing? So if we approve a special project for a different use than in like the CBD district, for example, does that then change the ability to, have a short term?
That's a great question. The interaction between those two, right? Because this will look at the underlying zoning district, regardless of what's on it. But to your point, if there was a special project that allowed residential in CBD, right? And say there's a development that came in there, then it would be, because this would say, as long as it's permitted residential, this would be allowed in there. So, but special projects is that overall trump card, but.
Can I jump in for a second? So a while back, we did that project above, I think it was the sports card place, right? They put apartments up there. So can you use that as an example? So there's residential above that sports card shop. Could that be, let's say this passes in its current form, could that spot be used as a short-term rental?
Yes.
And would they have to come before us to get approval to use it as?
Yes, you would.
Okay.
And the reason why is because we made it a special exception use.
Gotcha.
So even though the upper floor apartment use is permitted.
But they got a special exception for that apartment, but now you'd have to come back because it's a new.
Because it's a new category that we say this new subset has to come back.
Does everyone understand that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think so. I think my last question is thinking about loopholes. So say someone in a residential district were to hire, have a long-term lease, say it's a year or 2 years, whatever it is, it would not be considered short-term with, one tenant, if you will, which is a company that's in the business of bringing in short-term accommodations for people. So for executives that may be traveling from a European automaker and staying locally, might stay for a couple weeks while they're in town, and then a new set of executives rents from that company, same house, a month later, stays for 2 weeks. Where does that land?
That's a really good point. That's exactly where residents were born from. We're born because hotels weren't allowed to do short-term, long-term rentals. You couldn't do, just the opposite. If you're a hotel, you couldn't sign a 30-day program because nobody could afford it. So then they went to a residence inn style where they had kitchens inside. So you would pay a little bit more, but you could cook there. So that's a really good point. So if it works in the reverse, so if you had one lease, but every day you switch a different corporate person, I would call that short-term.
Yeah, for sure, and I know that was even more extreme than you were talking. You were talking about even, more often than a year lease or a 6-month lease, right? So I would say a sublease situation, we don't care who the landlord is or who's entering into agreements, it's the use of that property. Okay. So if it was, if someone was gonna be there for a month, that would be okay, right? Because, say 30 days, that would be okay. My guess is they're probably not moving them in and out more often than that, but maybe. But if they were, I would say that if they're renting it to someone for 2 weeks and they have someone coming up, the next weekend after they get it cleaned, then it would be a short-term rental. They would have to come back here to use that.
I know for a fact, there's 2 in First Street lofts that were purchased by companies that they bring them in for 4 days at a time. They still do that.
In those situations, most of the time, the executives are not paying, so that gets back to your remittance, like they're not, you know what I mean, like the company owns it, and then they just switch out who's visiting, and they're not actually paying or charging them for that use.
Well, it depends what we're talking about. I mean, the executive's employer would be paying on multiple occasions. There'd be different people coming in.
So, that would be, I guess, one of the problems and the challenges for municipal attorneys is if we try to address every single possible outcome like that, which is a good one, by the way, our code would be, this thick, right? So is that enough of a concern that we need to have a specific call out for it? Like a commercial, I'll see.
So I think I can help this. So, put in perspective, if we only allowed in the commercial district, they're motels, they're allowed. Who cares? If this was, it would only matter if you were in the residence or in the multiple family apartment buildings, and then you could do that. But in downtown, let them come in every week, then they're gonna spend their money and eat dinner probably downtown. So now that I think about it, not as concerning, where we're allowing them at. If it was in the apartment buildings, I think that would be horrible. Then you'd just be doing that like hotels. It doesn't bother me as much. Now the thing, downtown did, they come in, contractors come in for a work week to work on a project, they rent there, week at a time, so.
I would say if someone, First Street lofts, for instance, that's actually a really good example, because that would prohibit it in,
Because it's RM1, right?
That's RM, is that RM there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that would prohibit it, so they would have to comply with the ordinance, I guess. If they had someone that was in there for a week,
That's actually a special project.
Well, but what's the underlying?
Underlying is a CBD, I think.
Well, so if it's CBD, then it would be allowed.
So just to understand, make sure I understand, it's about the use, what happens with the property, not necessarily who the tenant is, whether the tenant's subleasing. It's about what's happening with the movement of different people in and out of a property.
That's fair.
Because my concern is someone circumvents this by hiring a third-party company to lease the property, and that third-party company is
We would address that, like, if it was one person, the owner.
Just directly with the owner.
Because a lot of these short-term rentals, they use management company type things to run that for them. So I don't care if it's the actual owner that's doing this, they're still gonna be on the hook for it. If they use a management company, I know there's people that specialize in finding renters for it, or just handling all the getting the cleaner involved, responding to the refrigerator that's on the fritz, you know, those, like a long-term rental, but just higher use. So, yeah, I don't care, and Chief wouldn't care if whoever's renting it, it's gonna ultimately go to the owner, because they're the ones responsible for what happens at the property.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just an interjection
Yes, please.
into this is, we know, there's quite a few homes that are being rented right now that I'll call them are rented by companies that then put up employees into those, houses. Typically, those are not short-term, and those are not the places that we're getting the complaints, so you're 100% correct, it's not the person who's in the house, it seems to be the time that they're there. In other words, if they're there for the weekend, those are the places that we're getting the complaints from. We're not getting the complaints from a person who's in the house for 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months. We typically, we've never gotten a complaint from those, and we know that we have multiple rental properties that are being used in that fashion.
Thank you.
So it seems to be the length of the stay that seems to generate the issues.
Thank you. Mr. Bach, thank you, Chief. Mr. Bachman, any more questions?
I appreciate those responses. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna jump to this side of the table for a second. Ms. Clausen?
Most of my questions are been asked. One thing is, the RM1 and RM2, because those have currently apartments in them, does the only rental periods of 28 days impact their business? You know?
Chief might know better, but I don't think anybody's month to month. It's very rare we even get month to month. There's some, but not less than month to month that I know of.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the full question, I apologize.
Just wondering if this is gonna create issues for the apartment RM1,
Yeah,
RM2.
Yeah, so
apartments that are-
I would say that up until this time, we have never had a complaint of an Airbnb in an apartment building or those type of structures. It's always been in an R1 classification, never with any of the other ones. But I think Attorney Crott was trying to have some consistency in the operation, but the only place that we've had complaints has always been in an R1 area, if that helps.
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yes, please.
I think that's a great thought. You know, assuming this goes through and gets adopted, this would be a good public information piece to send to all of our, now prohibited, you know, like the RM1s, right? We could give them hey, by the way, your leases can't be, you know, less than, 28 days. I mean, that's a good.
And I thought the 27 days was because of February, you didn't want anything less than 1 month. That's what my brain thought. Seriously, that I was like, okay, you got 28 days in February, that's the least amount of days in a month, so therefore, anything less than a month would be prohibited.
Yeah, it's just, it was a number, I could have picked 30.
Okay.
Just because in like, I think most people, when they rent, it's really for at least a 7-day increment.
Right.
But if someone wanted to say 30 days because it's a cleaner number, if you will,
I'm fine with 27, but I legit thought it was because of the February 28 days.
Yeah, I'd be curious, the new, drawing a blank on the new apartments that we just approved last meeting.
210
They're-
Deptford, Virginia.
210 and.
Yes, I'd be curious their thoughts because, they're apartments, they're towards young people who use a lot of Airbnb and like if this would impact what they were envisioning.
Yeah, I don't know anybody, I have a kid that's trying to rent out in Coeur d'Alene right now, and nothing's under, they don't, 6 months, they want a year now. 6 months, they don't wanna mess with this any less, certainly not month to month, almost impossible to find month to month anymore. It used to be a popular thing.
When I was in college, I think I did
Yeah,
some.
yeah.
And before I go to further question, Jeff, I also want to ask you, we discussed this at City Council. RM1, RM2, all these places, or not necessarily, but Stony Point and Stony Creek Ridge North, they all have homeowner associations. They can make their own rules and say, we're not doing, they cannot, is that? See,
So,
no, meaning they could prohibit it right now.
No, we could be more restrictive than what the code
Yeah.
allows, right?
the city, whatever their code is, the
Correct.
city is not gonna ever enforce it.
Right.
because that's a private contract,
Correct.
you know? But they can't allow what we prohibit.
Right, and what I'm saying the inverse. So let's say RM1 or RM2 was part of the stuff that, or the zoning that we said, okay, you can do short-term rentals there. They could restrict it
Well, they could.
in their HOA docs or their CNRs, correct?
I mean, I've looked at many HOA docs, and they require a minimum of 1 year
Right.
rentals, and almost every single that I've prepared and that I've reviewed, it's almost always either 6 months or 1 year, mostly
Right.
1 year.
For all practical purposes, we cannot change our bylaws or our deed restrictions without a minimum of 2/3 voting in
Yeah,
favor
you could
of it.
vote, you could, I mean, if everyone did it.
Practicality, it's like impossible.
No, I
to happen.
understand, but, you know, I'm talking the new ones. If they were to start, you know, building something new over there, they could have that in effect, but I just wanted to get that out there as well.
Yes, two parallel
Correct.
sets of regulations, city, and that's a question that we get is, hey, our bylaws require X, and they're not doing it. And we look and like, that's not a city code issue.
Yep.
You have to address that.
Right.
And vice versa, right, is if something's happening there, and it's not part of their, prohibited in their code, then they can't take homeowner or board enforcement action against them.
Gotcha. Jessica, any further question? Mr. Stone?
Yeah, thank you. Good discussion. Page 40 addresses parking on item 5A and part of 5B, I believe. Are we saying here that if I short-term rent my place, people can only park on my driveway? Because it says, provide off-street parking on paved portions of the premises, not in the yard, and not trailers and motor vehicles, which Fire Chief addressed. But what happens when people park on the street in front of the house?
Well, a house wouldn't be allowed.
Okay. What happens when they park on the street in front of the rental?
Which,
A rental, a short-term rental.
okay.
Well, I'm thinking, everybody, I got this house in Rochester, let's party tonight.
That's
And
right.
10 people show up and 9 are driving cars.
No, that's fair, because that's the
Right.
type of complaint that you get.
Right.
So if it's legal, I gotta be careful, because it does, right now say it has to be off-street parking, right? But I would say that if it was legal parking on the street, I think we wouldn't give them a ticket for it.
We have areas that are permit parking only, and you have to have a permit from that house it's right in front of their house, they get a permit for that. But if you have legal parking on your street, my street, one side of the street, that's anybody's parking, so I would think you could, I was wishing if they had 5 bedrooms and they were renting out to 5 different people, and there was a way to discover that, then they'd have to have 10 parking spaces, because at least 2 per unit. Like our residential right now, if you rent a duplex, you have to have 4 parking spaces, 2 per unit. But I don't think we can get into rooms.
You can't box them out anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like you can.
But your question, makes me think we should probably add language to say, off-street parking on paved portions of the property, or legally if permitted on the streets.
Right, like directly in front of the
I think we should
residence or
say that,
whatever.
because that's a great question.
So remember, on the east side, on the west side, we still have many residents with alley garages with no driveways on the front, right? And the garages are typically right on the alley, so you pull into your garage, very few of them have parking spots associated with them. So again, that's one of the issues that we have with one of the homes that has multiple bedrooms, then it sounds like they have, the party comes over and 6 people are there for the weekend, and then it takes up, spots on the residential street where they're parking at, because there's not enough room in the driveway.
Right.
But again,
But now you won't be able to do that.
well, I was just gonna say, to be clear.
We might solve our own problem.
This might be a moot point, because under if that's an R1, it wouldn't be permitted there, so this off-street parking would not be an issue.
Right. Push them in Nick's parking decks.
Yeah, there's only one, at the corner of Wilcox Street, across from the Hawthorne's building, there's one legit Airbnb in there, but they have their own little parking lot in the back, even though it's on gravel. It's there, so if they decide to have a party, they would have to use street parking. He's the only one that's legit there.
Before I do that, do you have any further questions, Mr. Stone?
No,
Okay.
Just
Mr.
to
Gasson.
follow up to that, I think, I see what happens there. I don't know which is Airbnb, but there's definitely short-term rental going on there.
And I know for sure there's one.
Where's this at?
It's probably,
Hawthorne, I mean.
By the school
look,
administration building up there.
Oh, the corner there, across from your house?
there's a lot of strangers. I meet someone new every week. It seems odd, and it's, parking is really a problem too.
Yeah.
So, but that wasn't my issue. I was gonna bring up, I think Mr. Stone and, the attorney were talking about on-site parking. And you mentioned in your introduction, on-site parking or off-street parking was required. Now, what if off-street parking is somehow captured by a grandfather? The example tonight, 4 are on site, but 7 is grandfathered. Is that a leeway for them to say, oh, I have 3 extra spots somewhere else?
It still has to be a legal, they have to, that's a business not having to provide it. But we still have to have the vehicle where it can be, right? Because the grandfathering of spaces is really just a parking calc, not necessarily a use issue. And I think we're putting it as a use issue, like you have to park either in a legal spot or an illegal, or in a legal spot on the road.
Even exactly, Moon River used to have, Carlos and Liz lived upstairs, and they started renting it out, they had 0 parking. And you couldn't park overnight in the parking lot behind them. Where did their tenants go? So they just found somewhere, they went into the decks and had to pay 24 hours with 1 hour free. So they buy a parking pass, but there could be a few like that, David, but not too many.
Yes, I know we've in the past looked at that, like in the back half of the old Chase Bank, there's grandfathering in that overall picture. I think you mentioned the trading card spot, there's some of that. But you mentioned if it's a legal spot, it's a legal spot.
Correct.
So that's the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
If it's not on site, it's grandfathered, it's somewhere else, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, and then I'll get, go ahead, Jessica.
I just have one more thought, and I don't know if it's captured in here, I was trying to see, but, it was brought up room rentals, and this would prohibit room rentals as well, and based on, I guess what we're saying, the problem we're solving for is that it's not a permanent resident at these locations, right? And they're coming and going, and there's lots of people, which is still true with a room rental, but you have your resident living there. And I can see, like, in some of these newer apartments that are going up, these young folks that have an extra room now, renting those out to other college students or things like that. And I just think that raising that is something that I think occurs pretty frequently now with Airbnbs, is just room rentals with the resident living there. And I think this addresses it and doesn't permit those, but there could be pushback potentially on that situation. Because this feels like mostly we're talking about residential homes, right? That the occupancy is the full home. And there are other situations where it's not the whole home, it's literally a bedroom. You can't even use the kitchen.
But if they're taking, technically, if they're taking dollars in to pay their rent, then they're a rental. They have to be registered as a rental. Now, technically, they'd be an Airbnb, which is not allowed, other than an RM1, because if a room is Airbnb, is you stay in the house and serve them breakfast or whatever.
No, that's
bed and breakfast.
That's bed and breakfast.
I'm saying, that's what I meant to say, bed and breakfast. So we had one legal bed and breakfast, which disappeared now. That's the only one we ever had in town. So technically, if you're renting a room to somebody, you are a bed and breakfast.
Then that's the Airbnb original model, right?
Yeah, it was just room
Was the room versus VRBO, which was always the whole thing. I would say even if they're just renting out a room, that's a rental. That would be.
Yeah, I think that's how I read it, is that
Yeah, me too.
any short-term rental arrangement, whether it's the full
Or a room.
building or facility or room, is not
Agreed.
prohibited.
And just to interject again, I remind everyone that this is going to be complaint-driven, and we've never had that, I'm sure that situation, you're 100% correct, that there's a lot of people who are unassociated but are sharing rent in an apartment or whatever, but we've never had complaints from those
types of
Alice Pine
operations.
Street, I can think of a couple, but
And if I could point out, so it is addressed in here, so when we look at the definitions, the short-term rental definition says the rental or subletting of any dwelling. Well, then we define dwelling, which means a building or a portion of a building that provides for, sleeping, eating, and it says, and one or more separate bedrooms for sleeping. So I think we're covered on that.
Well, along Jessica's comments, something similar is a Bullet family, where you have families that will take on, in baseball or hockey, they'll take on a player, and they would live in their home. And they do get compensated, but they get usually compensated by the league. In fact, the organization that runs Jimmy John's Field, they're headquartered here in Rochester. And they have many of their players living with families in Rochester.
living is.
Appleby.
But is that, I'm not familiar with that concept, but is that typically for a week?
No,
It's for season.
For season.
the whole season.
Though, okay.
It's like a
Big
company.
hockey,
So that would be a
Yeah.
long-term lease then?
Yeah.
Or not?
Unless the player gets traded or cut.
They still gotta pay him for the duration of the lease?
That's
They
it.
just move somebody else in.
Or that too.
Mr. Mayor, you had some questions.
Well, yeah, just more comments. I mean, I think this is a great discussion. I mean, we're never gonna get it 100%, but Rich, you made a comment that it's, the problem's small, but I think it's growing.
It's growing.
And I think sometimes we think of these Airbnbs as, a family goes skiing someplace, where I think now it's starting to come here and party. We started to have issues, even law enforcement issues going on here. So that's why I'm really in favor of this. But yeah, I mean, I think, and the other thing is we need to give, the chief and administration some enforcement capabilities, because right now, well, we can write them a ticket and we can do this and we have to get a court, I mean, it's just, and then it just goes on and on and on and on. So, I mean, to me, and, I've said this about a lot of different ordinances, we gotta give administration something that they can, act on it in a timely way that makes a difference. Right now we have one in particular that's just causing problems, and there's really not a lot we can do about it. We can cite them, and it has to go to court, and there's a little fine, and, well, that's not really doing anything. So I think that we need to do something on this. I haven't had one near me, but I don't think I want one. And I think most people think that way, so I'm hoping that we move forward with this, get a public hearing, let's, hear what the people have to say, let's move, do the best we can and keep moving with this.
Do we expect much pushback from the other side, the people who want to have these short-term leases?
I don't think they'll come to public meetings, but you'll get emails. Because there are property rights folks saying, there are people, guy built a brand new house for $1 million and he's never lived in it, never planned on it. He lives in Puerto Rico. And he's making a lot of money on that. The neighbors, 5 cars on that street every night, not just from that one house, every night. And that's not fair. So I don't think they'll be able to push back hard, but we'll get some.
We always do.
We always do.
Let them, let them push.
And take their.
That's what public hearings are for.
That's what public hearings for, right?
And
We
so,
listen to everybody.
in that sense, are there any other discussion of items, or anyone like to make any comments? So if there is any interest in setting this for I guess a motion would be requested to set this for public hearing.
I will make that motion.
Okay. Support. Okay, discussion? Mr. Peckins, roll call, please.
Hauser,
Yes.
Vixen,
Yes.
Bachman,
Yes.
Clauser,
Yes.
Gasson,
Yes.
Kenjuk,
Yes.
Stone.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Good
And
discussion.
it was very good discussion, lots of good ideas, thank you. So can you give me and give us just a little insight as to how this would progress then, because we're gonna get questions I wanna be able to answer.
So because you've now set this, so at your May assuming.
May 6th, yep.
The May meeting would be the date for the public hearing. At that time, if you assume that, board decides to move it forward to city council for its consideration, then it goes to their next available, which would be probably the following
First
week.
meeting in May,
It's
yeah.
probably the first, 7 days after your meeting.
Oh, it can go that quickly?
Well, to get to there, and then city council will set a public hearing because it's a zoning
Yes.
ordinance.
Then
Okay.
30 more days.
So you're talking, at this point, you're talking 2 months to enactment that's aggressive, but I think that considering the subject matter, that's probably inaccurate.
It falls within the timeline I think we discussed about July 1st-ish or so at the city council.
That's about right.
Okay.
Can I just ask you a question about
Of course.
how are we gonna advertise or get the word out about the public hearing?
So every public hearing, is put into the newspaper, like this for zoning ordinances. So it'll be noticed in there, and it'll be on the city has a spot for public hearings that it will go into. But there won't be mailings because it's not individual property specific.
I would predict that the newspaper's gonna pick this up. It's a hot topic.
And go on to the website and stuff as well.
And you will contact the RM1, RM2?
Not yet, because it's not a property specific that you wouldn't give anybody individual notice on this type of thing. If it was a rezoning of a particular property, you would, but you're just talking about a general ordinance, you wouldn't notify, individuals.
If there's a particular property within like 300 feet or something, you'd have to send a notice out specifically.
That's right.
This one wouldn't fit in that category.
Correct.
Okay? All right. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so next, public comment. Any public comment about what was discussed here at the meeting? Rose, anyone on the phone?
No, there is no one online.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, and then I guess we'll just go to maybe more miscellaneous, and Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, so there's a lot of plans right now. You saw a couple of them, 120 South Main. We sent a very detailed video, did hard reviews on those plans. There are plans for that project, for Solaronics project, for South Street project. So again, some of them had 23 comments on Dr. Atala's project. So we're gonna stick to Chairman McGee and Mr. Gaston's, don't bring them if they're not ready. So we're feeling pretty heavy-handed right now because we're doing a really good job, I will say, communicating with developers. Our planning commission said, don't bring them here with 23 things wrong. Vidia's already spending a ton of time reviewing them. Her job is not to design your site. So when you can get it right, where she can write a clean report, and there might be things about that you would want the planning commission to weigh in on, like what things look like or handicap stuff, different things, that's fine, but not checklist items. They have to have them complete. And we sit down with them, we bring them in now more. They've met with Vidia, gone to Northville and talked to her. So we're trying not to waste your time and, extend meetings, right? And some of them get a little irritated, like, well, you're really nitpicking me, but it's in the ordinance, so it's not a special project, just follow the site plan checklist, and we should be all right. So you're gonna have some pretty big projects if we can get through the reviews.
Okay. There was a meeting last week for the Solaronics project up at the community house, and I received, and I think some other people might have received, some emails about discussion topics that were raised and some questions. Can I forward those to you, and you could send those right over to the developer? I want to make sure that that's
Remember the developer, yes, but the developer ran the meeting, it was his meeting, not ours.
Right.
So I'm sure they heard. Now, I think somebody said on Facebook, there's other things that weren't in the meeting come out. If you guys see that, we'd be glad if.
I just want to make sure, yes, even if they've seen it 100 times, 101 times, just to make sure there's full transparency. And then is there any idea or insight as to when they will be back? When I say they, the Solaronics people will be back before the planning commission.
I mean, I saw Vidia's report, it's down to nothing. So if I would suspect they would be back in May, personally.
Okay, so you think possibly the May meeting. When would the earliest that we would know, or that you would know?
Next Friday.
Next Friday, okay.
Yeah, the 9th is my cutoff date for this month.
So they have to meet that, and we're not asking them to.
No, I get
They
it.
come in by the 9th, I've seen the report, it's clean.
And what would they have to bring in order to get on that May 8th or May 6th meeting?
Yeah, so the traffic study, the sustainability index, all the revisions, the little comments we had here, some of those things, and I think they've already addressed those. And elevations, exactly what they would like to be conditionally approved if the rezoning went.
They got the green light. Okay. All right. That's all I've got. Mr. Kenzick, any questions?
No, sir.
Mr. Bachman?
It sounds like there's a summary of that community house meeting with Solaronics. It sort of summarizes the feedback from the
It's-
community.
Yeah, I'll send it, yeah, it was
can we get
online.
that?
Send it to me and we'll send it out to
Yeah.
you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
It was on
That'd be
Facebook,
nice
which
to
I'm
look
not
at.
on, but it was on there. Yep, I'll get that out. Mr. Gaston, any comments? Jessica?
I'm good.
Mr. Stone?
No, sir.
Mr. Mayor? Good. Okay, I've got nothing further. Thank you, everyone. Meeting adjourned. Okay.
Anybody want to know the scores? I'm gonna go home and watch them all on DVR. They're all interesting.